Sit down, pal. Come on, don't be an asshole, Deckard.
I've got 4 skin jobs walking the streets.
I'm twice as quick now.
Stop right where you are. You know the score, pal. You're not cops, you're little people.
You ever buy snakes from the Egyptian, Taffy?
All the time, pal.
You ever see this girl, huh?
Never seen her buzz off.
Your license is in order, pal.
Everybody calls everybody pal in this world. It's so weird. What happened to buddy or guy or friend? Those are much better than pal. And welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, as always, Dr. Alex Swan. And today's episode, we're going to go down the AI train again, the dystopian future of Blade Runner. That's my impression of the wonderful music in this futuristic movie. It was one of Ridley Scott's earliest directorial outings, and, you know, has stood really the test of time, although I think it's kind of funny. The time in the movie is 2019, and we're already 5 years past that future. So, you know, what are you going to do? Anyways, the film stars Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard, Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty, Sean Young as Rachel, Edward James Olmos as a character named Gaff. I have questions about Gaff. Perhaps we'll get to them in the episode. Maybe we won't. Emmett Walsh as Police Captain Bryant. Daryl Hannah plays a replicant named Priss. William Sanderson plays J.F. Sebastian. Joe Turkel, who is a menacing guy, and in this movie, huge glasses, plays the head of the Tyrell Corporation, Tyrell. Joanna Cassidy, Jorah, and Brian James as the final replicant, Leon. James Hong has an interesting little cameo in it as well. He plays a guy who handles eyes, organic eyes for the replicants. Chu is his name. And then a bunch of random people. You know, it's an hour and 50, depending on which version you're watching. Yeah, that's right. There are several versions to this film. One of those versions was the theatrical cut that got released in 1982. Features terrible voiceovers by Harrison Ford, where he explains what it is that he's doing as opposed to just showing what he's doing. So one of those sins of filmmaking where you tell rather than show. And both Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott hated them. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, I don't remember exactly when the director's cut was released, where several scenes were put in that were taken out, probably by the studio at the time. And so things, a unicorn dream, removing the voiceover narration, few other scenes here and there, a little bit more of the ultra violence, a little more gore, a little more depth to the thematic quality that I would say the violence plays in this movie, and a few other bits and pieces here and there. And then about 30 seconds to a minute more frames, we'll call them, a few more scenes fleshed out for what was dubbed the final cut of the movie. And let's just say, let's hope that is actually the final cut of the movie, because, who knows these days? Ridley Scott might be going like, oh, maybe, I want to add more of this or that or this, whatever, to make my story more complete. But in any case, final cut is where we're at with this. And many of my analysis for this episode comes from my most recent rewatch, which was over the weekend. And I watched the final cut. Although you can get, I think, at maybe on Prime, Amazon, or Apple, where you rent, I think you can definitely rent the final cut. You can definitely rent the director's cut. I'm not sure about the theatrical cut. I feel like you can still get the theatrical cut if you pay for it. In any case, we are going to jump right in to this jam-packed episode of Are Replicants Real? And Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? My guest host today is Dr. Chris Mazurek. Chris had an extraordinary high school psychology teacher that led him to declare a psychology major at the University of Illinois. Hey, I know that place. Yeah. Wanting to be that teacher for a new generation led him to focus on teaching in higher ed before moving to graduate school in social psychology at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. There he studied with Jacqueline White and did doctoral work on social cognition in sexual violence. After completing his doctorate, Chris focused entirely on teaching, spending time variously as an adjunct instructor and tenured faculty member at High Point University, Birmingham Southern College, and Columbia College of Missouri. He is currently a teaching professor of psychology at the University of Virginia and the director of the undergraduate programs for the psychology department. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Alex. I'm really happy to be on. I'm excited to be part of the show. I've listened to some of your past episodes. You've had some great guests, and I just hope I can measure up today.
Well, I'm sure that's easy enough. And I'm happy to have you on. We chatted about this for many weeks. And even prior to that, when we saw each other at ACT back in October in Portland.
Yes.
So it's almost done, but how's your spring semester shaping up?
It's doing pretty well. I have the standard kind of academics experiences with the students being a little bit salty about how I do some of my grading, but it's to be expected.
Yeah,
we have some very high achieving students at UVA, and
okay,
they're really pushing the limits and indeed forcing me to write better exam questions. So I can thank them for that. And
only
I'm
can
busy
improve.
working on. Oh yeah. I'm busy working on planning an undergraduate research conference we do every spring and our commencement. So the administrative work is taking up some time right now, which getting a chance to fall back and talk just about some psychology stuff rather than worrying about catering and getting poster boards in is lovely.
How many people or how many students, I guess I should say, are part of this research conference?
We're going to be having, I think, about 52 poster presentations and 10 oral presentations.
Okay.
So it's pretty solid. We really draw mostly from UVA and from some surrounding states. We occasionally get people from as far as New York or Florida who will come. But it's usually on the Eastern Seaboard because we don't have money to be able, we'll print people's posters for them. Yeah. But we can't offer travel money or accommodations for students to travel out from, say, Central Illinois. And that's it's going to limit things a little bit unless somebody desperately wants to come out here. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're hoping to apply to graduate school out of the area or something.
I was thinking, as soon as you said something, people come from New York, I'm like, oh, they're angling somehow. They're like, I know this school. These people here are somebody I want to work with, right? Well, more power to them. I wonder if it works.
I couldn't say for sure. But if anybody wants to give it a shot, we do it every April. So keep an eye on the University of Virginia Psychology Department website next year. You can shoot your shot. Come on out. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. And is it only undergraduates? It's an undergraduate conference. I love those.
Yes.
I love those. Yes. So that's the one we do every year in the Illinois, Iowa region. Iowa is what we call it.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't get a chance to go out this year because I think based on schedules and stuff, it was too early for my students. So they didn't feel prepared, even with extra credit incentives. We didn't get a chance to do that. It was at Culver Stockton in Canton, Missouri.
Sure.
This past a couple of weeks ago, it was. All right. So this is a film podcast as much as it is psychology, so let's brush a little bit of the psychology to the side and talk about movies for a second. So I like to probe my guests on their thoughts on film, just in general. What do you like about movies? What fascinates you about this art medium? And so we'll start there, and then I'll pick your brain on then incorporating that in teaching.
Well, I've always been a big reader when I was a kid. And I like genre fiction. I like sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, romance. I like good story. And the theater of your mind is wonderful. You can do a lot trying to imagine what somebody would look like or how things would be. But the particular vision you can get from a particular auteur in directing film, or the technical kind of the spectacular technical visions you can get, like with the development of Industrial Light and Magic for, the original Star Wars film.
Yeah.
Coming up with things that you just wouldn't ever have expected to see. And it really opens up your mind thinking about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
You have a good story. And that's part of the reason artsy films, classic literature, I'm putting that in quotes there. There's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy that. But I like a good story for me to focus on, and having a particular filmic vision, a director's vision, a particular kind of a specific actor or a particular kind of special effects approach to certain kinds of films. Those things can add a lot to how I understand the story.
Yeah.
And so anime has its own conventions, and Disney animation has its own conventions. And, going high budget sci-fi versus low budget sci-fi, none of those are bad, but you can take the same story and see it in a variety of different ways, experience it different ways. And I'm the kind of person who can watch movies multiple times or can read stories multiple times. And so getting that change, getting that approach is different. I mean, I've been so very fortunate over the last, 20 to 30 years of my life, I guess, where a lot of good literary properties that I've enjoyed have made it to film or television.
Right.
And that is, not just things like the Harry Potter stuff, some of the new Star Wars things growing out of, expansions on previous stories.
So-called legends now.
Yes. Oh God, breaks my heart. But that stuff. And comic books.
Yeah.
I was an avid collector when I had money in high school. And, then later on after I got a job. But those things, seeing that stuff translated in a way that I wouldn't have expected it to before, seeing how folks decided to put things forward, has been, it's delightful. I don't always agree with some of the choices.
Sure.
But that somebody has done it that way. It's something that I have happened. If you spend any time on the internet, you know how dangerous it can be. People can be dreadful online, but
No.
yeah, I hate to break this to you,
What?
Alex. I know
Oh, man.
you're always out there looking for the good in people, and I respect that about you. But yeah, some places you need to have some Clorox wipes or something when you're going there on the internet. But people they'll get so head up about things not being like they want it to be.
Right.
But I think it might have been with, maybe Lord of the Rings or something. People complaining about Peter Jackson's films and how those looked.
The Hobbit, I think, is what you might be referring to. The Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah. People saying that, that the book is still there. That hasn't gone anywhere.
Right.
You can
still
experience of that.
You can still play it in your mind.
Yeah, like how you love the story isn't poisoned by, it isn't killed by, it isn't replaced by the new Hobbit quote unquote trilogy. It's just not. And if you do that, you're going to spend a lot of time being mad about stuff without spending that time enjoying the thing that you like. I don't like this particularly, so I would rather read the book or vice versa.
Yeah.
I actually like a film better than a book. So there we go. And being able to, I don't know, I don't really like to talk about these things as guilty pleasures because I just don't like that phraseology, right? I should be able to take pleasure in stuff like this without feeling bad about it.
Right, without feeling bad. Absolutely.
Yeah, the whole thing of being able to see these stories, whether I've read about them or not, brought to life in the way they are is fantastic. And I've had some friends who are, you're into film. A close friend of mine from Missouri was she taught in communications and film was kind of her area. And talking with her about things like the John Wick films, at one end, and then musicals like Brigadoon and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and then going back to the weird Cabinet of Dr. Caligari stuff was it was fascinating to hear it from that side.
Yeah.
Things that I'd seen and trying to kind of get that feel for it. So it's been a real fun learning experience for me.
Awesome. Speaking of learning, let's take the second part of this question here. So what kind of relationship do you have with film and movies in your teaching?
For a framework, I'm in my early 50s.
Okay.
And the media landscape that college students inhabit now is quite different from the one I grew up with. Better in a lot of ways, it's worse in some ways, but it's just different. And so having one of the things I like to do in class is have a common referent.
Okay.
Right now, when I was teaching at High Point University and Birmingham Southern and Columbia College, I had small classes.
Okay.
And they didn't draw a lot from outside the region they were in. They were regional schools, nothing wrong with that, but they got most of their students from relatively close by.
Sure.
So I could get, the High Point students were folks from kind of the Piedmont area, central North Carolina.
Okay.
Columbia College is right smack in the middle of Missouri. And so we got a lot of students from Columbia and from the rural farming communities surrounding Columbia. And so trying to understand what's going to resonate with students when you're talking to them, because all of psychology, even the neuro stuff, even the hardcore cognitive stuff, it's all applied.
Yeah.
Psychology is an inherently applied discipline. I don't think we can get away from that. And so I want to see about showing students how this applies. And I've got a decent imagination. I can come up with examples or whatever.
Yeah.
But having a common reference where I could say, okay, who here has seen, 10 Things I Hate About You or Mean Girls or how many people have seen, Captain America Civil War or whatever. If I have those reference down that I could expect most people would see, it gives me that extra kind of hook that I could get into. They may not understand when I bring up an example from my life because I'm just older than a lot of my students now. I'm old enough to be the parent of many of my students.
Sure.
God help me. I mentioned the Challenger explosion in class the other day and a lot of blank looks, right? So Yeah, I felt old, but as you kind of go on from this stuff, we need a lingua franca, right? We need a common language,
Right.
something that
I agree.
we can tie into. And so with streaming, people can have access to most films somehow.
Yeah.
And if I can tie something into, hey, there's this movie. If you haven't seen this movie, you can get it on Netflix or Paramount Plus or whatever. They're not sponsors of this podcast. I'll mention that. But so you have these avenues. And if you're in this, you can see a good example of A or B or C.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we could even talk about if we want to, about how imperfect it is. How did they get the psychology wrong?
Right.
What does this say about the something I know you're very excited about and familiar with, people's misconceptions about psychological realities?
Yeah.
When people talk like this, what are they getting wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And we can get everybody on the same page. And now that I'm teaching classes of 350 students that are drawn still mostly from Virginia, but they're coming from a broader area, it's even harder to get that kind of common language. And, I can't expect that a lot of the stuff that I enjoy is going to be enjoyed by every student in my class. And I don't want to speak to just 10% of the students. I want to speak to 100% of them. And I can get closer to that if I can use film, because film, for all that stuff, goes to streaming now a lot and people will watch it at home. It can still be kind of an event. And I think that can be useful.
Yeah. And which is why I use class time to watch films and clips and things like that, because it does have that event quality to it. Everyone's there and we're all watching it together. Today, in fact, in learning psych, we just started Groundhog Day.
Oh yeah.
And
nice.
I asked before I pressed play, I asked how many people had seen it before, and I would say about 8 hands shot up. And so, they're going to experience Groundhog Day in a new way now, right? Which is taking their class material and applying it to the movie and just trying to figure out where it is in the movie and be able to use those terms and concepts and ideas and just verbalize how the scene is showing it, right? How the scene is showing it.
Morphology. Longevity, incept dates.
Don't know. I don't know such stuff. I just do eyes. Just eyes. Genetic design. Just eyes. You Nexus, huh? I design your eyes.
Sure. If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes. Questions?
I don't know answers.
Who does?
Tyrell. He knows everything.
Tyrell Corporation?
He's big boss, big genius. He designed your mind, your brain.
Huh? Smart.
Go.
Not an easy man to see.
Give me gold.
I guess.
Sebastian, he take you there. He take you there.
Sebastian who?
J. F. Sebastian.
Now, where would we find this J.F. Sebastian?
So let's jump into our current discussion on Blade Runner. So one thing that I wanted to mention, and this takes me back to your initial discussion about why you like movies, and you started with this idea of a story. And I'm curious, have you read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick?
Yes, I have read that.
Excellent.
It was actually part of a wonderful college class I had, literature of science fiction. So
Okay.
everybody, benefits of a liberal arts education. Go for that. Yep.
Very good. So,
yeah.
So the movie Blade Runner is based on Philip K. Dick's short story about, whether androids dream of electric sheep. I was telling my wife Astrid about, watching this again for the show. And I couldn't remember the name of the story. And so I said, do robots dream of electric sheep? Or I said something like, do electric robots dream of electric sheep or something like that.
Okay.
Close enough.
Yeah.
So androids, of course, in this case are the replicants, and we'll certainly get into those. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to hear from you, Chris, because you were the one who suggested this out of a few suggestions, but I pulled it out because I do enjoy the themes and the potential for psych concepts that are in this movie, as many sci-fi movies that have artificial intelligence portrayed in it. So what was your thinking on adding this to your possibilities list? Well,
that AI aspect of it was one of the things. Mm-hmm. It's not an area that I have a ton of knowledge on, mm-hmm. but I did, given that some of my research was in social cognition, I did a fair bit of reading in cognitive psychology and things like structure of knowledge and other stuff like that in graduate school. And getting at and as we'll talk about this, I won't spoil much of our discussion ahead of time, so we can come at that a little fresh later. Getting at issues about how things like thought and memory and emotion and that plays into what we consider to be the essential nature of humanity was a big thing. It's something that is inherent to both the novel and the film. And in the film, the novel is super weird. If you have never read it, there's a whole thing with an electric monk. It's very strange. But
it is very strange.
Yeah, yes. It's worth putting the time in, but it's not always an easy read. And it's not, the film is taken from parts of the book.
Right.
But in the film, Ridley Scott as a director really seemed to be playing with this framework for it. He just kept the parts that related to this idea of kind of what does it mean to be a person, and taking all these people and all the different things that go into what a person is. I mean, I started thinking about developmental psychology and a couple bits about social psychology, as well as the obvious cognitive psychology stuff. And so I thought, for a podcast like this, where some of your listeners are going to be psychological professionals as professors, many of them are likely to be students, and other folks just like to hear about movies and want to hear about this. I figured this would give us the opportunity to talk about a lot of different things that are psychological. So that was one of the reasons I put it out there. The other reason is when I was thinking about movies I liked and movies that really had an impact on me, Blade Runner is just such a thing. It has such a vibe to it, a mood to it. And when you look at text stories, we can look at William Gibson's Neuromancer as really on paper putting together this heavily Japanese influenced, corporatized version of the future. And Scott's film, at least it's the first one I'm aware of, that really took that sensibility and made it visual. That gave you the visual language there. You have the lights and the grain in the film, and you have the Vangelis score, which even if you don't like electronic music, it's so evocative.
I did my best impression of it in the intro.
Oh my gosh. That's delightful. That's going to be great. But yeah. And so that that kind of thing, getting this movie that has a certain feel to it, I thought that's going to be cool. If somebody hasn't seen this, it might be worth it for them just to experience that.
Yeah, take 2 hours out of your day and give it your full attention, because it is also a very good movie for showing and not telling.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't watch the theatrical version, which has terrible narration by Harrison Ford in the PI noir style, right? And terrible narration.
Man, yeah. Watch the final cut. That's the one you want to see.
Watch the final cut. Although I was reading about the versions after I watched the final cut over the weekend, because it's been a couple of decades since I had last seen it.
Sure.
Not that I haven't seen any like bits and pieces here and there.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how many times I've seen the final Tears in the Rain monologue, but in any case, so I watched the final cut and I go to Wikipedia and I'm like, all right, what are the differences between, because I know I've seen the director's cut and I know I've seen the theatrical cut. What are the differences? Well, there isn't very much difference between the director's cut and the final cut. Marketing, I think, is really what it comes down to.
Really? Because I had never seen the director's cut. Yeah, I didn't even know that there was one. I knew the final cut was the one that everyone I knew, because I saw the theatrical cut back in the day when it was out on video.
Yeah.
But when the final cut, they're like, no, this is the one to see. And I saw it, and voiceover was gone, and I was like, you had me at hello. We're good. Yeah.
So yeah, all of the stuff that Ridley Scott wanted to do back in 1982 were in the director's cut. So that was the massive leap from removing the voiceover narration, adding several scenes to add various context, the violence, more violence, or at least more grand violence, we'll say. Sure. From the director's cut to the final cut, again, kind of just marketing in my opinion, because we go from 1 hour 56 minutes to 1 hour 57 minutes. So
that's a pretty damn important minute, I'm sure. Yeah, it's got to be.
I think maybe the unicorn bits I think the unicorn dream is slightly longer, like maybe 20-30 seconds maybe, and then another set of frames elsewhere in the movie. So again, not crazy different, but yeah, so if you see anything directors or final, I think you can't go wrong with either one.
Yeah.
You're reading a magazine, you come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please. You show it to your husband. He likes it so much he hangs it on your bedroom wall.
I wouldn't let him.
Why not?
I should be enough for it.
You're watching a stage play. A banquet is in progress. The guests are enjoying an appetizer of raw oysters. The entree consists of boiled dog.
Would you step out for a few moments, Rachel? Thank you.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed. How many questions does it usually take to spot one?
I don't get it, Tyrell.
How many questions?
20, 30 cross-referenced.
It took more than 100 for Rachel, didn't it?
She doesn't know.
She's beginning to suspect, I think.
Suspect? How can it not know what it is?
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more. We began to recognize in them strange obsession. After all, they are emotionally inexperienced with only a few years in which to store up the experiences which you and I take for granted. If we gift them with the past, we create a cushion or pillow for their emotions, and consequently we can control them better.
Memories. You're talking about memories.
So let's jump into our first chat here. And of course, we have to talk about the replicants because they are the feature of the movie. So Blade Runners, as the opening's text tells you, are special police, we'll just call them, who hunt down replicants. Replicants are androids that are machines on the inside and human fleshy looking on the outside. You even meet one of the, I guess, suppliers, we'll call them, of the organic tissue. He's played by James Hong, and he deals with eyes, and he has this back and forth with Roy Batty about Roy's particular eyes. But of course, these replicants are used as slave labor on off-world colonies, off-Earth colonies, and they don't like that. And so they have been making a mess of things. So these Blade Runners are put into the field to essentially indiscriminately kill what is called retiring a replicant. So the replicants. What could you tell us about these replicants, Chris?
Oh, man. So the replicant, this is our, to the extent that there's supposed to be a boogeyman in the film at the beginning, this is it, right? Our protagonist, Deckard, played by Harrison Ford in the film, he's got that noir vibe, right? He's the alienated, worn down, private detective kind of guy. He's even got the long coat and the drinking problem, right? It's all there.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in the second segment.
Definitely. The replicants, though, when you watch the film, for those of you who are either watching along or you're watching it before or after you've seen this, there's a bit where they're going through this group of replicants that have managed to make it back to Earth. Now, at this point in the faraway days of 2019, we have, I know, I mean, it's 2024 and we don't have outer space colonies or anything, but they do in the movie. And so some of these replicants have left outer space because that's where they all are. The replicants they may be made on Earth, but the clear, I don't know if they say this specifically, but the clear implication is they do not belong on Earth. We send them out to do other things. We see descriptions of 4 replicants that Deckard is being tasked to hunt down and quote unquote retire.
Right.
These replicants, you can see as they talk about them, there's a soldier, there's a worker, there's a pleasure model. Super exploitative, super gross, right? The idea that these, I mean, they have names, but, they're not described, these aren't really their avocations, even though it's the thing that they're doing.
Right.
It's very clear that these were tools designed for the project of fighting battles in outer space, or working on a spaceship, or being some kind of sexual toy for workers on a mining colony. Right? And so that's putting our replicants in this, it's othering them very quickly, right? These are not human. These are terrible things that have decided to run away from where they belong, come back, and hide out on Earth. And while they're doing this, to escape and to hide themselves on Earth, they can't help but cause damage and destruction. So that's why we need to get rid of them. These replicants, though, they look like humans. They act like humans. And you even find out early on, they kind of feel like humans in the sense that they emote like humans. But not exactly, not entirely. And that gets into a little bit more of the development of how they're trying to make these replicants, as the Tyrell Corporation has as its motto, more human than human.
Right.
The corporate entity that creates these replicants, it's called the Tyrell Corporation. We spend some time there in the film. We meet the guy who's primarily responsible for developing the replicants. And as our protagonist is going to try to learn more about these replicants so he can better hunt them down and kill them. He meets with the head of the Tyrell organization, who's had one of his employees killed by one of these replicants. The thought being that they might be trying to essentially meet their maker and do this. And so as Deckard is talking with them, he's learning a little bit about how they're trying to see about adding memories to these replicants, and that they may be doing so based on memories of actual people, not artificial people. And this is interesting because as they're talking about the reason for these memories is the replicants have a kind of kill switch built into them. They only are set to really last for 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And the reason this is there is because it seems like after that time, the replicants completely lose their minds.
Yep.
They just go, they just can't handle anything, and they have to be put down. And you start, as you're looking at this, you start getting into the sense of when these replicants are created, they have everything that kind of goes with a person, but they don't seem to have memories or really much in the way of emotion. They seem to have some, but that starts to develop. And looking at it from my side of things, I start seeing about the way that as humans, we have a framework, a socialization framework, a group of child rearing norms and practices where we expect humans to develop in a particular way. They're going to start to experience different kinds of emotions at different times in their lives as their brains mature and they become cognitively able to do so in line with feedback from outside them.
Yeah.
So it's a bit much, but right, little babies, their emotions are very basic.
So I think it's important to note here that these 4 replicants are Nexus 6 models with the 4-year lifespan. They are meant to do that one job, as you mentioned, Chris. They're meant to do the one job, and at the end of the 4 years, it essentially shut off. But as we see, they're having, and especially Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty having severe existential crises, in the sense that, as you mentioned too, wanting to meet their maker and extend their life. So they're essentially trying to stay alive so they can keep experiencing the world and maybe make their own memories. At least that's what I took from it. They wanted to make their own memories. They wanted to not be beholden to their jobs at Tyrell Corporation or through whatever kinds of off-world colonization that's going on right now. They wanted to be a part of the world. And you kind of see that with Zora. Zora is the first one to be killed. And, she goes to a club and performs with a snake on her. And she's like...
yeah, she is an exotic snake dancer.
Snake dancer. She wants... And we have to assume that's like what she wants to be. She doesn't know who Deckard is when he comes and sees her until she realizes that he's not who he Deckard's playing, like this character with Harrison Ford doing a really high pitch voice.
That didn't age well at all, did it?
It did not.
It did not. No.
So, she's like, who are you? What are you doing? And then realizes that, this is not good. This guy's a Blade Runner and I'm screwed or whatever. And so I got to get away. And you can see the fear in her face when she's trying to hide from him during the streets of LA chase. And so you see from them a desire to be a part of this world, however gross and claustrophobic and dirty and specifically wet. I've never seen it rain so much in Los Angeles, but what are you gonna do, right?
Oh, well, it's noir, right? So it's always dark and it's always rainy.
Yeah, you never see you only see the sun once and it's setting. in the movie.
Oh man. But no, I think your take on the replicants is right? They are through the course of the movie, you get to a point where it really seems to become apparent that the replicants just want a life of their own, and they want to be left alone. And the idea that they have these emotions that have started to develop, and remember, they're in fully human bodies. Like they apparently they don't have childhood, right? They are created as adult bodies.
Yeah, adult bodies.
And so they come into these bodies, they're put into service, doing whatever jobs they're doing immediately. And they don't have a good framework for the emotions that they're experiencing. But those emotions, the core for them is there. And as it starts to develop, they don't have parents or caregivers there to kind of shape a child's emotional responses or to help them learn to regulate their own emotional states.
Yeah.
The people who own these replicants don't seem to care about that. They're tools to be used until they break or die. And that's it. And so being in a situation like that, how do you manage your emotions? Like the very complicated emotions that might go around with killing a bunch of other people in a space battle, dealing with lonely people who are looking for some kind of sex partner if you're one of these pleasure models of the robot or something. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the other people around? And how do you understand and cope with those feelings? It can't be easy. And it's not surprising these replicants just completely lose it at some period in time. And the Tyrell Corporation's next step is not to slow down production. It's not to see about giving these replicants a crash course in what it means to be human. It's taking existing memories from other people and somehow porting those into the mind of the replicants so that they feel, when they're trying to understand what they feel or what they're thinking or how that works, that is tying back to something that gives context to it and gives some framework to it. And we see a little bit of this with Kowalski. He's the second replicant that gets killed. He's the first one we see in the film who ends up killing the other detective at Tyrell Corporation. At Tyrell Corporation.
Most biggest explosion of a gunshot that I've ever seen in a movie. And he just gets flung backward into the cubicle wall. It's like, wow, okay.
They have incredibly powerful guns in this version of 2019. It's not a very big handgun he has, but it seems to do a lot of damage.
It's got a lot of punching power. For sure.
It does. But yeah, taking that in there. I mean, Kowalski, when he's found out and has to run, he's upset because the photos he was given of his ersatz childhood.
Yeah.
Or his Potemkin childhood, rather, that they're lost to him, and they mean something to him, and so we see them trying to improve this process, and we see that in the person, if you will, of another Nexus 6 that we run into, or was she Nexus 7?
You think I'm a replicant, don't you?
Look.
It's me with my mother.
Yeah? Remember when you were 6? You and your brother snuck into an empty building through a basement window. You were gonna play doctor. He showed you his, and when it got to be your turn, you chickened and ran. Remember that? You ever tell anybody that? Your mother, Tyrell, anybody? Huh? You remember the spider that lived in a bush outside your window? Orange body, green legs. Watched her build a web all summer. Then one day there's a big egg in it. The egg hatched.
The egg hatched,
Yeah.
and 100 baby spiders came out. And they ate her.
Implants. Those aren't your memories. They're somebody else's. They're Tyrell's nieces. Okay. Bad joke. I made a bad joke. You're not a replicant. Go home. Okay? No, really. I'm sorry. Go home. Want a drink? I'll get you a drink. I'll get a glass.
Yeah, Rachel, I don't think Tyrell gives her a model name, but rather just refers to her as the next step.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Rachel has memories of his niece, and we have to assume that either Deckard knows this for some reason, or in his communications with Tyrell after he speaks with Rachel and does the Voight Comp test on her, that Tyrell explains, oh yeah, no, she's got my niece's memories, and here's one particular one, and Deckard uses that to show Rachel that she is not a real person, and he does it in a very very rude and cruel way, like, oh girl, you are not real. Let me guess, here's a memory. I've never met you in my entire life, but I can tell you this exact memory. Haha, you're not real. Loser.
Yeah, it's not a good look for Deckard. Like, this is our ostensible protagonist, but there are times when you look at him and you're just like, oh, dude, come on, man. I mean, because Rachel's character, Rachel, Sean Young. Sean Young is the actress's name.
Mm-hmm.
She does a decent job, I think, of looking very at sea at this idea of knowing what replicants are, like understanding, because she's working at Tyrell, kind of about all of them, and then realizing everything I've thought or said about them applies to me as well.
Right.
And trying to negotiate that, it has got to be hard. But these machines that feel like humans, but don't have a way to process those emotions like humans, that can make new memories, but don't have a history of memory that they could use to inform and govern their own behavior. I mean, you can see the problem, right? You can see how anybody experiencing something like this would be in a really rough state. And if you happen to be an artificial being that can punch through walls and, do other like massive military things, that can be a problem. So we see a little bit why this is an issue, why these replicants need to be retired. But when you see Zora trying to, live a life, I can't be an assassin. That was her other skill set. She was like a political assassin or something. That's not a job you just apply for, right? So,
right.
But yeah, I can dance. I can do this. I'm good at it. I can start a life for myself, whatever that's like, but it's mine. And you can start to feel some sympathy for these characters as well. And that duality there, where you can understand some of the constraints on the artificiality, but you start to see, some essential humanness of these replicants, and seeing, given that your protagonist's whole job is to kill them, that makes the progression through the movie, it's what gives that kind of part of that noir vibe, as well as the dark and the rain and the sax music, the electronic music or something. Like, it's got that sense,
right? I agree. And you hint at like what these people are doing, and I wrote it in my notes, and I was like, they're all experiencing existential crises, right? So they came back to Earth to live a life, but to also see if they can extend that life. And so that's the literal definition of an existential crisis, right? I'm gonna die, and it's gonna be soon. Is there anything I can do to not die, right? And when Tyrell tells Roy and Pris, you can't live longer, there's no possible way that you can live for longer, he kills Tyrell. Roy kills Tyrell, and he does so by gouging out his eyes, a la what happens in Game of Thrones. Like I feel like Game of Thrones was like, we see what you did, and we're gonna do it even gorier than that.
Oh God, it was so gross. Yeah, no, you're right.
And so, right, and one question that I kept thinking of is like, okay, Roy knows when he's going to die, and I'm sure all replicants, Nexus 6 replicants, know when they're going to die. They know when their out of service date is because they know they're replicants. As opposed to Rachel, who didn't know she was a replicant until Deckard basically pulled the rug out from under her, right?
Yeah.
They know that they're replicants, and they know when they're going to die. How would humans feel if they knew the exact moment that we were going to die?
Now this is interesting because you do have a part in the film. It's easy to miss, but there's a little part in the film where I can't remember which one of the replicants it was, and I didn't take notes on it very well. I apologize. Where one of the replicants is like, "What was my date? Like, what was my incept date?"
Yeah, incept date, right?
And so they're wondering, like, when was I born?
Mm-hmm.
So then I will know when I die.
Right.
Like the implication being, I know I've got a clock running,
mm-hmm.
but while I don't know how long that clock is, I know it's coming soon.
Yeah,
and that drives, I think, a lot of the stuff that you see from these replicants. When for folks, when you're watching this film and you see that scene, it's in the latter part of the film, maybe the last third of the film, when Roy Batty gets to meet Tyrell and gets the news. There's nothing that can be done for you.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry. It's not like we haven't tried. We've tried, but it's done. Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty doesn't seem gleeful at killing Tyrell.
No.
It looks incredibly despondent and tortured and despairing. It is a wonderful performance there. You can't really forgive him for that, but still, right?
What about EMS recombination?
We've already tried it. Ethyl methane sulfonate is an alkylating agent and a potent mutagen. It created a virus so lethal the subject was dead before he left the table.
Then a repressive protein that blocks the operating cells.
Wouldn't obstruct replication, but it does give rise to an error in replication so that the newly formed DNA strand carries a mutation and you've got a virus again. But all of this is academic. You were made as well as we could make you.
But not to last.
The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very brightly, Roy. Look at you. You're the prodigal son. You're quite a prize.
I've done questionable things.
Also extraordinary things. Revel in your time.
Nothing the god of biomechanics wouldn't let you in heaven.
I mean, he's still technically the antagonist of the movie,
yeah.
But I would consider Roy Batty and, of course, Hauer's portrayal of it as a tragic figure because, yeah, he engages in some less than ideal behavior. I mean, of course, murder and things like that. It's not a good look for him, right? And he is quick to anger and all of these kinds of things, but when you think about like he is a rat in a cage, and he is up against one of those cage walls, right? And you pointed out the specific language used to speak to Deckard of like living in fear, especially when Deckard's losing that fight at the end of the movie. And he's just that's what it means to be a slave, living in constant fear. And he embodies that set of emotions and the tragedy of, I don't know, very similar to maybe getting a little too close to the sun.
Icarus. Yeah.
Yes, Icarus.
Yeah. No, yeah. See, I think you've really touched on something super interesting when you talk about like if we knew exactly the moment we were going to die, how would that affect us?
Right.
And so through social psychology, it's maybe not as popular as it used to be. It had its day for a while there, a little bit back. Terror management theory, you might have heard of. So, the idea that people will experience existential fears, and they find ways to minimize that.
Right.
And it's an interesting way of looking at when you get people really scared about their imminent demise, how do they respond?
Right.
And, some cases it's people try to gain control over fear of death. So those of our listeners who are, big fans of, the horror genre or, like gory slasher movie type things, understanding that, cheering for the final girl, doing all that kind of thing, right? That can be a way to feel like this is horrible things, but I can kind of get through it.
Yeah.
And it's not real. Other people will just try to turn away from it entirely. But I would imagine as you get closer and closer to what might be a realistic end date, and in the film, you can see this, right? And this is right when we're getting into the last part of the film, we're getting to our final showdown. Deckard has retired 3 of the replicants already. Only the leader, Roy Batty, is left.
Wait, let's be clear. Rachel kills Leon Kowalski.
That is entirely fair. I do not want to take that away from Rachel. Yeah, Deckard is about to get his ticket punched. And Rachel, she backshots him.
Yeah.
And that had to be tough for her too. But so sorry, Rachel. We'll get you in there. But so when you see a point where Roy Batty's hand kind of clenches up or seizes up, and you can tell like the way he's kind of responding to it. I don't know if he actually says anything or if it's just implied there that like he's getting close to shutting down and he knows it. Right. And he's got to stop that somehow. And he does the very Jesus-y thing of pushing a nail through his palm, which, isn't very evocative at all, but it somehow short circuits something or whatever, or, completes a circuit, or it does something to get him to be able to move around again.
Yeah.
And at that point, you'd imagine Batty knows that his time is numbered in minutes. Like I'm not going to be around for another week or a month.
Right.
If I live out the night, that's going to be a lot. But he's still got to deal with Deckard and that situation. And his response to that, he still pursues Deckard. But the whole last part of their last confrontation, where he's chasing Deckard jumps to another building, but almost falls off. And, our villain, Roy Batty, pulls him up to safety. Just as he loses his grip on the edge of this building, their story's up. And he was bound for a disgusting splat on the rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles. He's grabbed. If I remember, was it by the hand with the nail in it? I can't remember if it was for sure. Maybe that's too on the nose. But he gets grabbed and he gets pulled up by Roy Batty.
Yeah, and I want to read one of the terrible narrating lines that Harrison Ford delivers.
Go for it. Yeah.
In right after this moment, I don't know why he saved my life. Maybe in those last moments, he loved life more than he ever had before. Not just his life, anybody's life, my life. All he'd wanted were the same answers the rest of us want. Where do I come from? Where am I going? How long have I got? All I could do was sit there and watch him die. It's some great voiceover right there, right?
I mean, the thing is, we've got, and you know this is a film guy, right? You want to show, not tell.
Right.
You didn't need to tell us that, because the whole last bit of that video, that I know who you've seen that video, because I go and see the same one every once in a while, where Harrison Ford's Deckard is terrified. He was about to die. He knows he should be dead again. And this guy who he was trying to kill is just looking at him and basically tells him that, I've had a life. I've had an incredible life. I've seen amazing things, and
that you would never imagine, couldn't possibly imagine, right?
And you know what? That's when I die, those things are going to be gone. Like, that's who I am. And that I like people to recognize that. At the end, you are here. You need to know that I had this life. And he didn't need to say that to him, but he felt compelled to say that to him, right?
Yeah.
Roy Batty could have just let him fall or just saved him and walked off because Deckard had lost his gun. He could have just gone, but he had that sense, knowing that the time was close. What is it? How am I going to talk about the end of my life?
Yeah.
And what he chose to do, like, look, these are the things for me. And this is another one of those big psychological things that I really took to in the film. My experiences, my memories, those are me.
Right.
And they're going to be gone.
Like tears in the rain.
Yep. Oh, I can't believe that was a kind of half ad lib by Howard. That's unbelievable.
I know.
Props to him. Jeez.
When you could do those kinds of things in a movie and be just heralded for it.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. But yeah, I really think, and this is an area that I don't have a lot of experience in, but you might, or our listeners might, when you have a parent who has a diagnosis of a terminal illness, and they know they've got some time, but they don't know exactly how long.
Yeah.
How do people respond to that? I mean, Erickson had his ideas about the last stages of life and people trying to leave a legacy for themselves. That was, we had that. And then the ego integrity versus despair, the final stage of psychosocial development.
Right.
Do you accept your life as it was with a sense of completeness, or do you despair over what could have been and what you didn't do?
I like to characterize this as the one of the fundamental questions that are a part of psychology, not one that all psychologists attempt to answer in many ways with their own research, but just one of those broad philosophical questions that we are still attempting to, find empirical answers for. And that is, what is the nature of memory, and why is it such an important feature of what brings humanity its sentience, its awareness? Why humans have this ability to use information of our past experiences, and why then that defines us or doesn't define us, right? So the Tears in the Rain monologue, which isn't very long, it's a few lines here and there about some of the things that Roy has done, but it characterizes his life and nobody else's life. His short 4-year lifespan has been defined by these things that he's done. And if you take that idea and you apply it to human beings, so will I be defined by my memories and experiences? Will people remember me for, I don't know, this podcast? Or my YouTube channel, or the things that I've written about for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, like all of these kinds of things. Is that the definition of what makes something human, or what allows us to separate something that is alive that we should not harm or a tool that we've given this ability to. I think it's very strange from Tyrell's perspective to create these androids. And of course, this all goes back to, Dick's central thesis in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right? So like, what's the nature of existence if you're not a organic living creature, right? And this kind of is in a roundabout way, kind of like a throwaway line, but J.F. Sebastian asks Roy and Pris to do something like as if they were like robots, and he wanted to see them do the robot dance or something like that, and they're like, bro, we're not computers. You can go see those computers over there. They're boxes with screens on them, right? And Pris, brings up some Descartes, and it's like, I think, therefore I am. And they all have a good laugh about it because you gave them the ability to think independently. And now you go around and like shoot them in the back because they're not supposed to be on Earth.
Yeah. And the whole replicant vibe, and hopefully what people have been pulling from this conversation, that if you haven't seen the film, you can watch for, and if you've seen it, you probably got the vibe for this too. As the film goes on, the replicants seem more and more human.
Yes.
And it's not, I don't know that Deckard necessarily seems less human. He never seems particularly human throughout a lot of the film. But you kind of get a sense for, these beings, for all that they may be dangerous in their own way, they don't seem like these kind of skin jobs, these monsters that we're making them out to be. There's something there that we would recognize. And that, if we saw them on a street or dancing in a club or whatever, we wouldn't see them as anything less than human.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know enough about individuals who have had maybe family members with traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer's disease or other neurodegenerative problems where they're pretty clear on how different their parent or grandparent is because of the lost memory. Like they don't know that they used to value being demure or, very conservative. They're cursing like I've never heard them do it before.
Yeah.
There are things that like they just seem like a different person. Are they different because their memories have gone? Does that make you a different person?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that, but it's something that we think about, I think, and we wonder. I don't know. Has it ever happened to you, Alex, where maybe you and Astrid remember something differently?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And whose version matters, or would it matter? Should it matter? Right? Rather than maybe it's better for you to have your own version because that's what defines you, right? That goes back to the central open question of psychology is like, what about our memories is us? And or another way to put it is, are we our collective experiences from birth to current, right?
Oh man, that is, and the whole question about how something like the large language models and the generative AI stuff we see nowadays, like, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think I read something about it, but I can't source it right at the moment, that somebody had set loose one of these large language models on either the internet as a whole or maybe Reddit because it's Reddit. And that in a very brief period of time, it became like a hate spewing Nazi AI or something. Am I making that up? Or I don't know if you heard anything like that.
I think that was real, and it was very Age of Ultron-esque, where Ultron, when he was quote unquote born in that movie, which is coming up on 10 years old now.
Oh gosh,
he sees that humanity just needs to be extinguished because they're so terrible to each other. And yeah, if you give the computer the input of hate, then yes, it's going to reflect that, right? Just like LLMs today that are not Nazis, that doesn't act like Nazis, like ChatGPT, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, is still reflective of human input, right? Because ChatGPT still makes biased answers when it comes to medical decisions for a white person versus a black person, right? So the input is the output is as biased as our input is, right? Because it's reflective of what humans can do. That's its constraint, which is why I'm not so worried about, Skynet kind of possibilities, because it's only reflective of us in the sense that, okay, well, if we give it the ability to launch nuclear weapons, well, then it's going to launch nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Let's just not give them that button.
Right.
That would be great.
Right. And so when you give androids the ability to blend in with humanity, you're asking for them to blend in with humanity. And when you start telling them, no, you're only going to live 4 years, you can't blend in with humanity, they're like, well, what am I supposed to do then?
Yeah. And their life, the experiences that they have are lives of war and servitude and slavery.
Yeah. And fear, as they say.
Yeah. And so that's what I have. That's what's shaping how I understand my world and my life and my humanity. And I don't know. You start thinking the fact that these guys, if they didn't fear being hunted down, would have just, I don't know, gotten jobs and just done it until they died, maybe. I don't know. But it is, trying to see how emotion and memory comes together to help form this kind of self, and how the culture and society and expectations combine with the hardwired end of lifespan clock. It is tragic. It's a tragic kind of situation for those things to be in.
Yeah.
And you can't help but feel for the replicants in having this kind of raw deal. We're going to let you go out there and have just enough life to know what you're missing, and then you're going to die.
Yeah, we're going to give we're going to give you sentience, and then we're going to pull the rug out from under you. Have fun. Because they're the old boogeyman, as you said at the very beginning of this conversation, of the immigrant taking jobs from Americans, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. I hadn't thought of that. Oh, yeah. Wow.
So we as a society in this movie, humans made that boogeyman to do jobs that humans can't or don't want to do. But then we gave them all of the abilities, at least cognitive abilities of people, and then we take it away from them when it starts making sense for them. And I think that's, I don't think while they're technically antagonists in the movie, I think if you've got an eye for morality and for psychology, there's no way that you can think that they're any different from an animal that's trying to protect its young or their home or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's part of what gives it the whole, it plays up that noir vibe to it.
Yeah.
Like, are there really any heroes or villains in this movie? Or are they all pretty much, I don't know, is everything pretty much terrible? I don't know if we want to go there, but like, that sense of equivocation.
Yeah.
That whole, I don't know if I want to say despair so much, but that feeling that you get from it, that, wow, things can look really rough.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time. Like tears in rain. Time to die.
So I want to take a quick break and come back and talk about the Voight-Kampff test, because it's really a really fun little test that they play a couple of times in the movie. So we'll be right back talking Blade Runner. Are you a big fan of the Cinema Psych podcast? A connoisseur of the compelling stories and intriguing insights that we have on this show? Well, show your love in style with our premium podcast merchandise. Yeah, that's right. I've updated the podcast store from ultra comfy hoodies, perfect for cozy podcast binges, to sleek coffee mugs that add a dash of personality to your morning routine. Our merchandise store has it all. I've added so many new products, and it's designed to withstand countless listening marathons. There are a lot of episodes. I think you'll love them. But wait, there is more. Every week, there is a new promotion, turning up the volume on value. So keep an eye out for our exciting special promotions. Every other week, 15% off. In between, sometimes there's a special 25% off day. And then sometimes there's free shipping. It's the perfect way to score your Cinema Psych podcast merch for less. I'm excited to have expanded the merchandise offerings, but I'm really excited to say that new designs are coming up. And you can put these designs on all of the merchandise. So keep an eye out for new arrivals in the design section. So don't just listen, wear it, flaunt it, live it. Visit our merchandise store at cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com/store to shop your love for the Cinema Psych podcast today. Remember, every purchase goes directly to supporting this show. And of course, thanks for listening to this show. I love doing it. Now let's get back into it. And we are back with Dr. Chris Mazurek talking Blade Runner. So this segment, I want to talk about the Voight-Kampff test, then talk a little bit about Decker, and then maybe end with a little bit of Ridley Scott's filmmaking, specifically regarding the replicants and Deckard. So let's talk this Voight-Kampff test. What is this test, Chris?
Well, it is, there's a machine that has a very high resolution scan of somebody's eyeball.
Yep.
And there's some other indicator lights and other things on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the subject of the Voight-Kampff test is given certain scenarios or asked certain questions that they're to posit an answer to.
Mm-hmm.
The questions themselves can seem somewhat nonsensical. They don't really appear to build on each other very much.
No, they're like super disconnected.
Yeah, but they have kind of a weird vibe to them, where when you hear some of the very first questions being given to Kowalski, the replicant at the beginning,
mm-hmm.
And you hear a more extensive version given to Rachel,
right?
When Deckard is trying out the machine on her. the questions are designed to elicit particular kinds of emotional responses. And the implication is that if you're testing a replicant, either they don't have the appropriate emotional responses, or the emotional response is attenuated in some way. Like
Right.
they're not responding how they should.
How a human would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm
Or
sorry.
should.
Yeah, how a human would.
Right.
And so that we can use this test to tell that. So when, in the history of psychological testing, there's, some of the things that as a social psychologist I would do would involve more traditional self-report measures.
Mm-hmm.
I would give people some paper. I'd ask them to mark down the extent to which they think this is true of them or not. But there are physiological measures you can do as well.
Yeah.
And people can use things like the extent to which a pupil will dilate or constrict, a flush response in the skin, or the ever popular galvanic skin response that is so traditionally a measure of the wonderful lie detector test that we see a lot of and maybe isn't as great as it could be. But,
yeah, I mean,
that's the point, right?
I mean, I think this is just the not too distant but slightly distant 2019 future of a lie detector, of a polygraph test, right?
Yeah.
And instead of testing lying, they're testing, empathetic reactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is like, this is in terms of trying to understand, is a person a replicant or not? And if you're going to use this test as a way to find that out, it's what you're doing is you've kind of normalized a set of emotional responses.
Yeah.
Responding in this fashion within this kind of set of error bars is what a real human being would do.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't respond in that way enough times, then we can tell that you're probably not human. And so you can get a sense of, at the beginning of the film, when Kowalski is given the test by the detective who gets massively shot by that pistol, whose name I can't remember. But Kowalski, you can see him. It seems like he's trying to avoid the questions.
Oh, yeah.
Like he knows what's going on,
right.
and he doesn't want them to see that he can't give the response that is expected.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what it should be.
I think the question about his mother, he was like, oh, this is, well, at least that's what I took from it. It's like this question right here. Oh, my mother, is when he shoots the gun. Because he can't answer questions about his mother. And so This is a perfect opportunity for him to take the shot.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you've got this, but it kind of falls apart relatively quickly. Whereas when Deckard is meeting with the new improved Nexus model, Rachel, he indicates in a discussion with Tyrell that it normally takes maybe 30 questions to determine that. And it took him, like 100 or so.
Yeah, it took him like a significantly higher amount.
Yeah, and so that may be something about the way they're giving these questions, or the way they're implanting these memories in the new models, is giving them better emotional responsivity, or more human emotional responsivity anyway. And it's an interesting kind of thing. Like, if there's this test out there that, can you study the right answers to it? Is it possible? I mean, could I make my pupils constrict and dilate at will? Maybe. Maybe people can do that. I don't know that I know how to do that. But, things like pupillary dilation and flush response and GSR aren't supposed to be things that most people are able to control. And so that would be something that you'd see here as well, right? Replicants shouldn't be able to properly mimic this.
And I think it's interesting with many of the questions that so it's that Leon gets asked, and then the questions that Rachel gets asked, a lot of them do have to do with animals. And it's there's a great website, and I think this might be the second time I've mentioned this website on this show in like the last 2 months or so, but it's doesthedogdie.com. So this website is for movie and TV shows. And the question is, does the dog die? Because we see there's a lot of movies out there where the death of humans is just part of the story, right?
Yeah.
Name any war movie, name any action movie, people are just dying. And really the whole movie code has been written around violence and allowing violence for most moviegoers, right?
Yeah.
But what audiences do not like is if animals are put in peril and they die in the movie. I mean, movies like All Dogs Go to Heaven, notwithstanding, because that's obviously an animated film and the nature of the movie. But if you are if you've gotten wind of a movie that has violence in it and animals in it, and you are absolutely not down for seeing those animals in distress, then you go to doesthedogdie.com and it will give you a breakdown of any animals in distress in these in the titles that you've looked up. And so you can avoid the ones where, animals are in distress. And I think that was interesting that a lot of the questions that you hear in the movie for the VK test are about animals.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if Tyrell programmed, or the people that programmed the replicants to not care about animals. And so being able to maybe empathize or perspective take on another human is maybe a little bit easier for a replicant to do, maybe an exorcist, maybe earlier models. And we have to imagine that the Voight-Kampff test is like years in the making and validation, right?
It has to be.
As a police tactic for sure, right?
Yeah.
So do they program them to try to interact with humans better so they can perspective take on humans? But when you throw an animal like a dog falling in a well, do they fall apart there? Is that the reasoning for that? I always found that interesting.
That's a fascinating question. I'm not sure, because one thing we get in the film is when you run into animals, they're essentially all artificial.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, it's a bigger thing. And it goes back to that whole title, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Right.
It is in the world of Blade Runner, in the text, having a real animal, like a live animal, is an incredible status symbol. It's only for wealthy people.
Okay.
Because a lot of them, I don't know if they've been killed off due to climate change or war or germ warfare or something. But you just don't get real animals. And this is one of the things that Deckard gets really worked up about, trying to get an animal.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of animal can he afford? And the idea that maybe this is something that people I don't know if we just have kind of if this is starting to get into some evolutionary psych stuff, if we have some kind of connection or memory there. That's not an area I have any expertise in, but I know it's out there.
Yeah.
Or if there's kind of social thing that goes with it. Every human on Earth knows you love and protect animals. A real live animal.
Yeah.
Being in distress, somebody's making dog for dinner. Oh my gosh, that would be how could you even consider that?
Right.
Even the extent to which a wasp stings you.
Mm-hmm.
You might be well, I mean, that's bad, but in a world where we don't have as many animals or insects, would I initially say, like Rachel does, I would kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Right away. I don't know. It seems like, from an engineering standpoint, that would be an interesting kind of failsafe. We know humans, by and large, care about animals.
Yeah.
And if I can make it so that the replicants don't, or are kind of perplexed by the whole idea, like, okay, animals, whatever, that we can use that as an easy way of identifying them. That would be really clever. Yeah, that could be a way of doing it. And I don't know how Dick, of course, is dead now, so he can't tell us, but it would be interesting to know what he could say about that.
Yeah. I don't know if Ridley Scott has said anything about it. And speaking of Ridley Scott, I wanted to shift our last focus to Deckard. He is he's a weird dude. He is a loner in that noir sense, as we've mentioned throughout. Severe alcoholic.
Oh yeah.
But there is an interesting filmmaking decision from Ridley Scott, and this sort of kind of wraps up. This is going to wrap up our discussion on the movie. So in scenes where there is a replicant and we know that they are replicants, Ridley Scott shone a light into their eyes while they were on camera, so their eyes would reflect, their pupils would reflect this light, and the main camera, would catch this as their eyes basically glowing. And this was supposed to indicate, according to Ridley Scott, that they were in fact a replicant. Now, one of the big questions surrounding Blade Runner, the film, is whether or not Deckard is himself a replicant. And we know that replicants can live longer than 4 years than the Nexus 6 models. We know that replicants can live longer, but we don't know what Deckard knows. We just know that he has some past with the LAPD and specifically Captain Bryant. You know, they have a history, but how long has that history been? There's this interesting unicorn dream that Deckard has, and Gaff leaves him. Edward James Olmos, we've barely mentioned him. This weird dude leaves him an origami unicorn in his apartment. So there's something going on here. Now, why did I bring up the eyes? Well, in every scene that Deckard is in, Harrison Ford, the eye shine does not occur, except if you're paying attention. And I'm specifically talking about the final cut here, because I cannot remember this particular scene from the theatrical cut that I saw like 30 years ago. In this particular scene, and I was looking for it too, every single scene, I was just like, I'm looking at everyone's eyes right now. He is talking with Rachel in his apartment, and her eyes are in the foreground. She's in the foreground, and she is in full focus. Just a generic close-up shot, but not too close. Her eyes are glistening, and Deckard is behind her, past her in the frame, and he's blurry in the dark, and you briefly, like it's like 5 frames, blink and you'll miss it, his eyes glisten. And that's all you see. You kind of can tell where his head shape is and everything. He's specifically blurry, and his eyes glisten. You're like, is Deckard a replicant?
Oh man, that question. I mean, that's one of the classic ones, right?
Yeah, classic film questions. Like goes with John Carpenter's The Thing, were they both infected with the thing at the end of the movie? Right. So it and that being another sci-fi movie, right, where you kind of leave it to the audience. So now you ask a bunch of people after 1982, people are asking this question because it's ambiguous, right? And it was purposefully left ambiguous in the movie. Ask Harrison Ford. He was like, no, I don't think he is. But he was also, let the audience decide. A true actor. Who's like, I played this part according to my director, and, you know, it is what's on the screen is how I did it. Whatever you want, put it on me, right?
Yeah.
But Ridley Scott has specifically said in no uncertain terms that he had always thought that Deckard was a replicant.
Wow. It's when I first saw the movie, I didn't go there at all. Didn't think he was a replicant. I'm like, no, come on.
Yeah, I will say that I saw the movie, like I said, well before I was doing any kind of film analysis. So, you know, when I saw a movie, I left it there. I was like, yeah, all right. So yeah, I didn't go there either.
Yeah. And then when I first heard people, I think I was either in high school or college when I first heard somebody talk about it. And I was like, wow, you're blowing my mind, man. Like Deckard's a replicant. That would be cool and dark and weird.
Yeah.
And so I didn't need any filmic evidence for that. I was just like, okay, sure. That would be really messed up. And I could totally get the vibe for that. I honestly can't remember in the book if he ever took the Voight-Kampff or not. The VK test. I don't know if he ever did.
Yeah.
But the fact that he gives it means he can't take it effectively, right? Or at least the oral responses. Like he could say the right things, but maybe his eyes wouldn't respond appropriately or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. He could say the right things, but maybe this physiological evidence would
clue him off. But but given in a position of, if he is a replicant, putting him in that position of, well, we've got a thief to catch a thief, right? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to put you in charge of finding these replicants because you're a replicant as well. Given that he doesn't know that he gets no advantage from that. He's obviously not Roy Batty Strong because he gets his ass beat.
He does survive though.
Well, no, that's true.
He survives being choked by Pris. She was doing thunder thighs on his.
That's right, she was.
His top of his head on his neck, and he was able to survive that. Yeah, he's gasping for air. He's choking. He's not like he's brushing off some dirt on his shoulder and continuing the fight like Captain America, but he does survive that attempt on his life. He survives. Well, even before that, he survived a good beatdown by Leon Kowalski as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And then at the very end, when he's going back and forth with Roy, he's getting his ass beat, but he's not dead. Roy punches a hole in the wall.
Now that's fair. That's a really fair interpretation. I like that. And in the final cut, back earlier in our discussion, you had mentioned how Roy rather callously heard from Tyrell one of the memories that was implanted in Rachel to give her a framework for her life.
Yeah.
And that he brings it up to her, given that he's uttered maybe, aside from the test, maybe 20 words to her, in their whole encounter.
Right.
He's like, I know I don't know you at all, but I know this really specific thing about your past.
Yeah.
How do I know that? Because that's Tyrell's niece's memory.
Right.
And they stuck it in your head. And I mean, he does not sugarcoat it, and it comes out brutal. And, Rachel takes it as strong evidence that, okay, I was wondering, I was worried, and I guess that's true. I guess I'm a replicant. Right at the end of the film, as Tyrell has been killed, all the replicants are dead, and Deckard goes to find Rachel. She is at his apartment, I guess. And he goes back to get her, and they're going to run off together.
Yep.
And so, okay, that's going to happen. And when he leaves his apartment, in the hallway, outside his apartment door, is an origami unicorn. And we have a really unexplained dream sequence where Deckard gets his head down for a few minutes, and he has a dream of a unicorn running through a forest.
Yep.
There's no explanation for why. He wakes up and is like, okay, well, we know that Edward James Olmos's character had made a couple other origami, another origami figure, a matchstick man at other points in the film.
Yeah.
And so clearly this came from him. And so how would he know to do something as kind of outlandish as a unicorn and give that, essentially present that to Deckard as a goodbye present?
Right.
I mean, that's, you know, I know kids might hear this podcast, so I won't get into the language here, but, you know, this would be this is a real way to screw with somebody's mind.
Yes.
Okay, you're heading off. Just so you know, that dream you had the other day, I know what kind of dream you had. Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, no. And we get our last view of Deckard and Rachel in the elevator. It's not quite the Graduate level of awkwardness when they're in there, but they still both have this kind of look on their face where they're just like, okay, this is happening. They don't look happy about leaving. They don't particularly look sad. They're just like, what is going on with our lives as they move through that? It seems pretty clear from the film that Scott did mean for him to be a replicant, and it really comes across that he is with those little hints, doesn't it?
It does. And I, after watching it again, I was watching it knowing it, and as I said, I was looking for the eye glint, of course, the telltale sign in the movie. And you know, I could be that could have been wishful perception of the eye glints of a man shrouded in darkness in the background, unfocused of the shot. But you know, I want to believe. I'm Mulder here. I want to believe. I want to take Ridley Scott at his word because of the way that, you know, the you know, the history of this film kind of unfolded and the fact that there are these many different versions of it. It's just like not many films have this issue where you've got one version that was released in theaters and then another one and then another one and then another one. It's like George Lucas constantly tinkering with Star Wars, right?
Oh dear.
Where
yes.
Star Wars in 1977, right, which didn't have the A New Hope attached to it at all, is completely different. Maybe not completely different.
Yeah.
I'll grant you that, but different than what we see in 1997, and then what we see in like 2008 or whatever the Blu-rays came out, and then even different in like 2012 when Disney bought Lucasfilm, like constantly tinkering with it. And so we don't have a lot of films in at least American film history that have all of these different versions. And I want to believe that Scott knew what he was doing by making it ambiguous, but still leaving those breadcrumbs for the viewer paying the most attention.
Scott is a very skilled director. I would not be at all surprised that he had this in mind and that he was able to get down to, you know, even, you know, a couple of frames worth of glints there just to give people that extra little hint about Deckard's bit. And it makes for, you know, if you know that going in or you glean that at the end of the movie with the unicorn and you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder if Deckard's a replicant. I mean, the kind of overarching feeling, I have spent this movie feeling for Deckard, right? He's trying to do a job. It's not an easy job. He seems conflicted about it. Maybe he shouldn't be killing these people that he's supposed to be killing, but he is.
Yeah.
And I'm there with him this whole time, and he was one of them the whole time.
The whole time?
Like everybody that I've come to empathize with in this film, whether it's, you know, maybe you can empathize with JF Sebastian or Tyrell or somebody, but, you know, our main characters and our, you know, constant secondary characters, having that sense when you leave it, like, I don't know what to think. I don't know what does make a person different from their feelings and their memories. And how can you separate aside a real and artificial person from that? I couldn't in the movie. What does that mean for our real lives and for our futures? It's a fascinating question.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Chris Mazurek for joining me to discuss a Blade Runner, the final cut, the director's cut, and even a little bit of the theatrical cut. Before we say goodbye, Chris, is there anything that you'd like to plug, talk about, where folks can find out more about you and what you've been doing?
I don't. I spend all my time teaching and doing administrative work. I don't publish any scholarly work at the moment. But what I'll ask your listeners to do is to really imagine and think about, as I mentioned briefly earlier in the podcast, the value of a liberal arts education. It seems weird to say it, but like learning at some deeper level about a lot of different things, like, for example, the literature of science fiction and all the stuff that goes on in there, film studies, other things like this, right? You're able to take these things from different areas. We've had allusions to Greek mythology in this podcast and other stuff. Like bringing that in, I think, really enriches our lives. And I want people to, find wonderful things to learn about the world around them, whether that's, whether you're a student in college or whether you're an adult who, maybe just dusts off your library card and goes out and, gets yourself some interesting things that you always wanted to learn about how film works or metaphor in literature or whatever. It's something that's brought a lot of joy to my life, and hopefully it will to other people's too.
Well, that's a great message, Chris. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you again for joining me.
Good to be here, Alice.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.